Good evening. Welcome. Tonight, we journey into the subtle yet profound distinction between mere sensation and the deeper entanglement we often call suffering, drawing from the wellspring of Zen wisdom. Before we embark on this shared path, if your heart feels inclined, consider sharing where in the world you are breathing with us tonight and what hour marks your present moment. This is a sanctuary for cultivating inner spaciousness, a place to nourish your consciousness and awaken the inherent clarity of your spirit. Here, you are invited simply to exist, to breathe, and to allow these words to softly guide you inward, reminding you of the profound stillness that already resides within. You already possess all you need. We are merely recalling the boundless peace that is your original nature. Should these reflections resonate deeply within your being, we gently encourage you to subscribe, ensuring this quiet harbor remains readily accessible whenever you seek its grounding embrace. Now, let us take a full, conscious breath, anchoring ourselves fully in this present awareness. The architect's unfinished arch. Let us begin with Kaito, an architect whose days were meticulously structured around the precise lines and visionary curves he brought to life on his drafting table. His studio, perched high above the city, hummed with the quiet industry of thought and creation. The scent of fresh blueprints mingling with the subtle aroma of aged wood and the distant muted symphony of urban life below. Kaito prided himself on his unwavering focus, his capacity to hold complex structures within his mind, envisioning every support, every span, every detail with an almost tactile clarity. Yet, for months, a persistent, dull ache had taken root in his left shoulder, a shadow that would ebb and flow, sometimes a faint whisper, other times a demanding throb that threatened to unravel his concentration and his composure. On this particular evening, as the last vestiges of daylight surrendered to the city's electric glow, Kaito found himself leaning over a sprawling schematic for a new public library, a project demanding both artistic flair and structural integrity. The ache, which had been a low hum, suddenly sharpened, a distinct, insistent sensation radiating from his scapula down his arm. It was not merely the physical discomfort that seized him, but the immediate cascade of thoughts that followed. Not again. This always happens when I am close to a breakthrough. Will I ever finish this section? This pain is going to ruin everything. This mental commentary, a familiar pattern, began to weave a denser, more restrictive fabric around the raw sensation. He observed his own mind, almost as if from a distance, watching how the initial, simple feeling of tension in his shoulder quickly transformed into a complex narrative of frustration, self-pity, and anxiety about future deadlines. The physical pain, a localized event, became the nucleus of a burgeoning storm of emotional unrest, an intricate web of resistance to what was, in that moment, undeniably present. His jaw tightened, his breathing became shallow, and a subtle tremor ran through his hand, blurring the precise lines he was attempting to draw. This was the subtle alchemy of suffering, where the mind's engagement with a sensation transmuted mere discomfort into a heavier burden. Kaito recalled a brief, poignant conversation with an elderly master builder he had once apprenticed under, a man named Haruki, whose hands, though gnarled with age, moved with an effortless grace. Haruki had once remarked, "The stone itself holds its weight. It is our struggle against its nature that exhausts us." At the time, Kaito had understood this only in terms of physical resistance, but now, hunched over his drawing, the words took on a new resonance, hinting at a deeper, internal form of struggle. It was a struggle not against the ache itself, but but against his own expectation that the ache should not be there, that his body should always perform flawlessly. This unfolding internal drama exemplified the core Buddhist teaching on suffering. The first arrow of pain is inevitable. The second arrow, the one that truly wounds, is our reaction to it. The physical twinge in Kaito's shoulder was the first arrow, a sensory input. His subsequent thoughts, his "not again," his worry about the future, his judgment of the pain's presence, these were the second arrows. This distinction is crucial for developing detachment, anicca, and equanimous observation. It is through mindful awareness, or sati, that we begin to discern the raw, impermanent sensation from the layers of narrative and aversion that our minds so readily construct around it, often fueled by trishna, a form of craving for things to be different. As Kaito paused, lifting his hand from the blueprint, he consciously softened his jaw and allowed a longer, slower exhalation. He decided to experiment, to meet the sensation in his shoulder not with resistance, but with a quiet, observing awareness. He closed his eyes for a moment, directing his full presence, his anapanasati, towards the precise location of the ache. He noticed its edges, its depth, its pulsating rhythm. He observed that it was not a solid, unchanging block of pain, but a dynamic, vibrating field of sensation, constantly shifting, ebbing, and flowing, never truly fixed. With this shift in his internal stance, something subtle yet profound began to occur. The ache was still undeniably present. It had not magically vanished. However, the emotional charge, the frustration, the anxiety, the sense of being ruined by it, these began to dissipate. The suffering, the mental anguish had lessened its grip. He was no longer fighting the sensation, but simply acknowledging it, allowing it to be, without needing it to be otherwise. This radical acceptance created a spaciousness, a profound stillness around the pain, preventing it from consuming his entire experience. The wisdom of this practice lies in understanding that while pain may be a given in human existence, suffering is often an optional add-on, a construct of a mind that clings to comfort and resists discomfort. By cultivating non-attachment to our preferences for how things should feel, we can begin to disentangle ourselves from the mental knots that bind us. This is not about denying pain, but about observing it with clarity, recognizing its impermanence, and refusing to allow it to dictate our inner state of being. It is the path to inner freedom, where the mind Buddha within recognizes its own original nature, unburdened by the stories it tells itself. Kaito opened his eyes, a quiet sense of contentment settling within him. The lines on his blueprint seemed clearer now, his hand steadier. The ache remained, a quiet companion, but it no longer held him captive. He understood that the unfinished arch of his shoulder's discomfort was not a flaw in his being, but an invitation to a deeper form of observation. This experience, though simple, illuminated a fundamental truth about how our minds interact with the world, a truth that would serve him well beyond the studio. Now, as Kaito prepares to continue his work, let us turn our attention to another craftsman, a weaver who also grapples with the fleeting nature of sensation, discovering the true source of her agitation, not in the prick of a thread, but in the unraveling of her mental patterns. The weaver's tangled thread. Ilara, a master weaver of the northern valleys, spent her days amidst the rhythmic clatter and hum of her loom, a symphony of wood and tension that filled her spacious workshop. Sunlight, filtered through the high windows, illuminated dust motes dancing in the air, catching the vibrant hues of wool, silk, and linen threads that hung in orderly cascades along the walls. Her hands, nimble and wise with decades of practice, moved with an almost subconscious grace, coaxing intricate patterns into being, each knot and pass a testament to patience and precision. The air was thick with the earthy scent of raw fibers and the faint, sweet perfume of the beeswax she used to strengthen her threads, creating an environment that was both demanding and deeply meditative. A space where the external world faded, replaced by the unfolding beauty of her craft. Today, Elara was engrossed in a particularly challenging commission, a tapestry depicting the winding paths of ancient rivers, a pattern that required a delicate balance of deep indigo and shimmering silver threads. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, her gaze fixed on the warp and weft, each movement of the shuttle a deliberate dance across the taut strands. The rhythmic thud of the beater echoed her steady breath, a quiet mantra of creation. She felt a deep sense of flow, a seamless integration with her work, where her mind and hands moved as one, anticipating the next stitch, the next color, the next subtle shift in texture, embodying a profound stillness even amidst the physical activity. Suddenly, a sharp, insistent prick pierced the tip of her left index finger, a tiny, almost invisible sliver of a silver thread that had strayed from its neat bundle. It was a momentary, acute sensation, a minor interruption in the grand scheme of her weaving. Her hand instinctively recoiled, a small gasp escaping her lips. This was the first arrow, a direct physical experience, undeniable and immediate. The pain itself, though keen, was fleeting, a small, localized event in the vast expanse of her body's sensations, a simple message from her nerves. However, the physical discomfort was swiftly followed by a familiar surge of irritation and frustration, a mental ripple that spread outwards from the tiny wound. Not now, she thought, a sharp edge to her inner voice. This thread is always causing trouble. It will disrupt the entire section. My rhythm is broken. How can I possibly regain this precise tension now? This internal monologue, a torrent of judgment and resistance, began to weave a far more intricate and painful pattern than the one on her loom, wrapping around the simple prick like a thorny vine, transforming it into a source of deep agitation. Her mind, once fluidly moving with the threads, now snagged on the perceived flaw, dwelling on the interruption rather than the task at hand. The momentary sting became magnified, not by its intensity, but by her aversion to it, her desire for an unbroken, perfect creative flow. She felt a tightening in her chest, a subtle clenching of her jaw, and her breath, previously deep and steady, became shallow and uneven. This was the unfolding of the second arrow, the suffering born not from the initial pain, but from her mental resistance to it, her craving for things to be different, to be without interruption or imperfection. Elara remembered the teachings of her grandmother, a dyer of rare skill, who would often say, "The dye takes where it will, and the cloth accepts its fate. Trying to force a color only muddies the water." Elara had always understood this in terms of accepting the natural variations in materials, but now the wisdom resonated on a deeper, more personal level. Her mind was trying to force the color of a perfect, uninterrupted weaving experience, and in doing so was muddling her inner peace, creating a dissonance that was far more distressing than the tiny prick itself. She paused, her hands resting gently on the loom, and took a slow, deliberate breath, inviting a spaciousness into her experience. She closed her eyes, directing her full presence, her sati, to the tip of her finger. She noticed that the sharp prick had already softened, transforming into a dull throb, then a mere awareness of residual tenderness. It was not a static, unchanging sensation, but a dynamic, impermanent event, constantly shifting, ebbing, and flowing, just like the threads on her loom, embodying the truth of anicca. By simply observing the sensation without judgment, without the narrative of disruption or imperfection, Ilara began to disentangle herself from the mental suffering she had created. The physical pain was a fact, a signal from her body, but the emotional turmoil was a choice, a consequence of her mind's resistance. She allowed the sensation to be, neither clinging to its absence nor pushing it away, cultivating an equanimity that embraced the reality of the moment, flaws and all. This quiet acceptance was a powerful act of letting go. Her breathing deepened, and a sense of calm returned to her, settling like the fine dust motes after a disturbance. The loom, which had seemed to mock her with its halted rhythm, now invited her back with its silent promise of creation. The small prick on her finger was still there, a minor note in the symphony of her body, but it no longer dictated the melody of her mind. Ilara understood that the true agitation came not from the stray thread, but from her internal struggle against the natural imperfections and interruptions of life. Thich Nhat Hanh once taught, "Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional." Ilara's experience with the thread was a living embodiment of this truth, a visceral lesson in the power of conscious awareness to distinguish between the raw data of sensation and the stories we weave around it. As she prepared to resume her intricate work, her heart now imbued with a renewed sense of acceptance for the ebb and flow of existence. Let us consider Silas, a meticulous cartographer who grapples with a different kind of void, learning that the true source of his anguish lies not in the absence of a cherished map, but in his mind's resistance to the space it leaves behind. The cartographer's erased map. Silas, a cartographer of exceptional precision, lived a life defined by order, by the elegant lines and measured distances of the maps he meticulously crafted. His studio, a sanctuary of quiet focus, was filled with the rich aroma of aged parchment, fine inks, and the subtle waxy scent of the antique globes that stood like sentinels in its corners. Every compass, every quill, every rolled chart had its designated place, reflecting Silas's deep reverence for accuracy and his belief that the world, though vast and unpredictable, could be understood, even contained, within the careful boundaries of a well-drawn map. Among his many creations, one map held a particularly cherished place in his heart, a sprawling hand-drawn chart of the forgotten trade routes of his ancestors, a labor of love that had taken him years to complete. It was not merely a representation of geography, but a tangible link to his heritage, a tactile memory of journeys long past, imbued with personal significance that transcended its factual data. Every faded ink mark, every delicate contour, every tiny handwritten note was a testament to his dedication, a silent whisper of history that he often traced with a reverent finger. One crisp autumn morning, as the first golden light of dawn streamed through his studio window, Silas reached for the map, intending to consult a specific detail for a new project. His hand hovered over the empty space where it should have been. A sudden, cold shock pierced him, a hollow sensation in his chest. The map was gone. Not merely misplaced, but utterly, inexplicably absent. The initial pang of loss was immediate and profound, a raw, visceral understanding of a void where something precious had resided. This was the first arrow, the sharp, undeniable reality of absence. However, the initial pang quickly escalated into a frantic internal scramble. Where could it be? I always put it back in this drawer. Did I leave it out? No, I couldn't have. This is impossible. How could I be so careless? His mind raced, fueled by disbelief and a burgeoning sense of self-reproach. He tore through his meticulously organized drawers, scattering parchments and instruments, his breathing growing shallow, his hands trembling with a nervous energy that was entirely disproportionate to the simple fact of the map's disappearance. This was the second arrow taking flight, the suffering born from his resistance to the reality of the loss. Silas's anguish deepened as he clung to the mental image of the map, replaying in his mind its intricate details, its faded colors, its unique texture. The more he held on to this mental reconstruction, the more acutely he felt the physical absence, transforming the empty space into a gaping wound in his carefully ordered world. His suffering was not merely the loss of the object itself, but the intense craving for its return, the relentless questioning of why and how, and his complete inability to accept the present reality of its non-existence. He was battling the void, trying to fill it with frantic thoughts. He remembered the words of an old explorer, a friend of his grandfather, who had once returned from a long journey with empty hands and a serene smile. "The map is not the territory," the explorer had said, and sometimes the most valuable discoveries are made when the map is lost entirely. At the time, Silas had dismissed it as poetic fancy, but now, as he stood amidst the disarray of his studio, the words echoed with an unsettling truth. He realized he had become so attached to his mental map of how his studio, his life, his possessions should be, that he was utterly unprepared for deviations. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Silas consciously halted his frantic search. He sat down amidst the scattered papers, allowing his body to settle, inviting a sense of spaciousness into his agitated mind. He closed his eyes, directing his full presence, his sati, towards the feeling of emptiness, the raw sensation of absence. He noticed that the frantic energy began to subside, replaced by a quiet, almost palpable stillness. The feeling of loss was still present, a dull ache, but the consuming anguish, the desperate craving for the map's return, began to recede, revealing a deeper peace. He recognized that the map, while precious, was ultimately a temporary form, subject to the impermanence, or anicca of all things. His suffering stemmed not from the loss itself, but from his resistance to this fundamental truth, his attachment to the map as a fixed, unchanging part of his reality. By letting go of this attachment, by embracing the sunyata, or emptiness of the space the map once filled, he found a quiet acceptance. The void was simply that, a void, not a personal affront, not a catastrophic failure, but a neutral space, a potential for new beginnings. This moment of quiet observation allowed Silas to disentangle the raw pain of loss from the suffering he had layered upon it. The initial pang was an inevitable human response to absence. The subsequent torment, however, was a product of his mind's resistance, its clinging to a past reality and its aversion to the present one. He understood that true inner freedom lay not in possessing all the maps, but in the ability to navigate the uncharted territories of life with an open heart and a mind unburdened by rigid expectations. Alan Watts often spoke of the importance of recognizing that the universe is not a fixed, static entity, but an ever-changing flow, and that clinging to any particular form inevitably leads to suffering. Silas, sitting in his quiet studio, now understood this not as an abstract concept, but as a lived experience. The map was gone, and that was the reality. His internal struggle against this reality had been the source of his deeper pain. As he slowly began to tidy his studio, not with frantic energy, but with a quiet sense of acceptance for the new space, let us now turn our attention to Lena, a glassblower who learns to use the power of conscious breathing to stay present with intense physical sensation, preventing her mind from spiraling into anxiety about potential burns. The glassblower's breath. Lena, a glassblower whose artistry transformed molten sand into ethereal forms, moved with practiced grace amidst the scorching heat and mesmerizing glow of her workshop. The air shimmered with invisible currents of warmth, and the constant roar of the furnace was a primal, living presence, a fiery heart at the core of her craft. The scent of superheated glass, faintly metallic and sweet, mingled with the earthy smell of clay from her tools. Her face, often beaded with sweat, bore the marks of intense concentration, her eyes reflecting the mesmerizing dance of liquid fire as she coaxed delicate shapes from the incandescent material, her body a vessel for the ancient art. Her work demanded not just skill, but an extraordinary level of physical endurance and mental fortitude. The heat emanating from the glory hole, where the glass was kept molten, was relentless, a searing embrace that could easily overwhelm the unprepared. Lena had learned to tolerate it, to move within its fiery domain. But even after years, there were moments when the sheer intensity of the warmth threatened to break her concentration, to pull her mind away from the delicate balance required to spin, inflate, and shape the incandescent mass, a dance between control and surrender. Today, she was working on a particularly large and complex vase, its delicate walls requiring sustained periods of proximity to the furnace's searing maw. As she rotated the glowing pontil, slowly inflating the molten bubble, a wave of intense heat washed over her face and arms, a fierce, undeniable sensation that seared at her exposed skin. This was the first arrow, a direct, potent physical experience, undeniable in its intensity. Her body's natural response was to flinch, to pull back, to resist the discomfort, to seek immediate relief from the blistering warmth. However, the physical discomfort was swiftly followed by a familiar surge of anxiety, a mental projection of potential harm. This is too hot. I'm going to burn myself. What if I drop this piece? All this work will be for nothing. This internal narrative, a cascade of fear and worry, began to weave a far more intricate and painful pattern than the simple sensation of heat. Her mind, instead of remaining present with the task, spiraled into a future of imagined failures and injuries, transforming the raw experience of warmth into a source of deep suffering, a mental inferno far more consuming than the physical one. Her breathing, previously deep and controlled, became shallow and ragged. Her shoulders tensed, and a tremor ran through her arms, threatening the smooth, continuous rotation of the pontil. The suffering arose not from the heat itself, which was a constant, predictable element of her craft, but from her mind's resistance to it, her craving for a cooler, safer environment, and her fearful projections of what might happen. She was battling not the fire, but her own fear of the fire, creating a self-imposed prison of worry that amplified the physical discomfort manifold. Lena recalled the teachings of her old master, a quiet man named Kenji, whose hands, though scarred from years of glass blowing, moved with an almost ethereal calm. Kenji had once told her, "The breath is your cool river, even in the heart of the flame. It is the only thing you truly control." At the time, Lena had understood this as a practical tip for endurance, but now, as the heat pressed in on her, the words resonated with a deeper internal truth, hinting at a way to navigate not just the physical inferno, but the mental one. Taking a deep, deliberate breath, Lena consciously anchored her attention to the sensation of the air entering and leaving her lungs. She felt the cool air fill her nostrils, descend into her belly, and then slowly release, carrying away some of the tension. She directed her full presence, her anapanasati, towards the physical sensation of the heat on her skin. She noticed its intensity, its spread, its pulsating nature. She observed that it was not a static, unchanging inferno, but a dynamic, impermanent event, constantly shifting, ebbing, and flowing, like the molten glass itself, embodying the truth of anicca. With each mindful breath, Lena created a spaciousness, a small pocket of calm within the intense heat. The physical sensation remained undeniably present, but the frantic anxiety, the fear of future burns, the mental suffering, began to dissipate. She was no longer fighting the heat, but simply acknowledging it, allowing it to be, without needing it to be otherwise. This radical acceptance, this willingness to be present with what is, created a profound stillness around the discomfort, preventing it from consuming her entire being. Her breathing deepened, and a sense of calm returned to her, settling like the fine ash after a furnace blast. Her hands became steadier, her movements more fluid, and the complex vase slowly began to take its intended form. The heat was still there, a fierce companion, but it no longer held her captive in a prison of fear. Lena understood that the true suffering came not from the searing warmth, but from her internal struggle against it, her mind's relentless projections of what could go wrong, fueled by Trishna, a form of craving for a different reality. Shunryu Suzuki Roshi taught, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind there are few." Lena, by returning to the beginner's mind, to the simple act of breathing and observing, found countless possibilities for navigating her challenging environment. Her experience with the furnace was a living embodiment of the power of conscious breathing to transform not the external reality, but her internal relationship to it. As she continues to coax beauty from fire, her heart now imbued with a renewed sense of equanimity for the ebb and flow of intense sensation. Let us consider Toru, a bell founder, who grapples with a different kind of resonance, discovering that the true source of his agitation lies not in a discordant note, but in his mind's judgment of the sound itself. The bell founder's resonant silence. Toru, a revered bell founder whose creations sang with a profound, almost spiritual clarity, worked in a vast, echoing foundry nestled in a remote valley. The air here was thick with the scent of molten bronze, charcoal, and damp earth, a primal aroma that spoke of ancient crafts and deep meditations. His days were spent amidst the colossal molds, the roaring fires of the smelting furnace, and the deafening clang of hammers shaping cooling metal. Yet despite the immense sounds, Toru cultivated an extraordinary internal stillness, a sensitivity to the most subtle vibrations, understanding that the true essence of a bell lay not just in its sound, but in the silence that gave birth to it. Today was a day of immense anticipation, the unveiling of his latest creation, a large temple bell commissioned for a newly built sanctuary. Months of meticulous work, of precise alloy ratios, careful mold preparation, and patient cooling had culminated in this moment. Toru, his face smudged with soot and streaked with sweat, stood before the colossal bronze form, his heart a mixture of hope and trepidation. He picked up the heavy wooden striker, his movements deliberate, almost ceremonial, as he prepared to test the bell's voice, to hear the culmination of his craft. With a deep breath, he swung the striker, and a magnificent deep tone resonated through the foundry, filling the vast space with its profound vibration. It was a rich, full sound, swelling and decaying with an almost hypnotic grace. However, amidst its grandeur, Toru's finely tuned ear caught a faint, almost imperceptible dissonance, a subtle impurity in the harmonic overtone series, a tiny deviation from the perfect, crystalline purity he had envisioned. This was the first arrow, a direct, objective auditory sensation, a fact of the bell's unique resonance. But the objective sound, quickly became entangled with a familiar surge of self-criticism and disappointment. A flaw. How could I have missed this? This bell is not perfect. It will not serve its purpose. All my efforts blemished by this single discordant note. This internal monologue, a relentless torrent of judgment and expectation, began to weave a far more intricate and painful pattern than the simple auditory observation. His mind, instead of merely hearing the sound, began to condemn it, transforming the unique resonance into a source of deep suffering, a mental cacophony far louder than the bell itself. His shoulders slumped, his brow furrowed, and a heavy sigh escaped his lips. The bell, which moments before had held such promise, now seemed to mock him with its imperfection. His suffering arose not from the sound itself, which was simply a vibration in the air, but from his mind's resistance to its reality, his craving for an unattainable perfection, and his judgment of his own craftsmanship. He was battling not the bell, but his own rigid idea of what a perfect bell should sound like, creating a self-imposed prison of critical thought that amplified the perceived flaw manifold. Toru remembered the teachings of his grandmother, a quiet, wise woman who would often tend to the temple gardens. She had once told him, "Even the most perfect flower has a petal that turns first, and in that turning there is a beauty all its own. Trying to hold it forever young is the greatest sadness." At the time, Toru had understood this only in terms of natural decay, but now, as the discordant note echoed in his mind, the words resonated with a deeper, internal truth, hinting at a way to navigate not just the physical world's imperfections, but the mental ones. Taking a deep, deliberate breath, Toru consciously anchored his attention to the sensation of the sound itself. He allowed his ears to simply receive the vibrations, without immediately labeling them as good or bad, perfect or flawed. He directed his full presence, his sati, towards the complex tapestry of tones, the fundamental note, the overtones, and yes, the subtle dissonance. He noticed that the sound was not a static, unchanging entity, but a dynamic, impermanent event, constantly shifting, ebbing and flowing, its resonance slowly decaying into silence, embodying the truth of sunyata, or emptiness. With each mindful breath, Toru created a spaciousness, a small pocket of calm within the auditory experience. The sound remained undeniably present, but the frantic self-criticism, the fear of failure, the mental suffering began to dissipate. He was no longer fighting the bell's unique voice, but simply acknowledging it, allowing it to be, without needing it to be otherwise. This radical acceptance, this willingness to be present with what is, created a profound stillness around the perceived flaw, preventing it from consuming his entire being and allowing him to experience the full presence of the bell. His breathing deepened, and a sense of calm returned to him, settling like the last, lingering vibration of a bell. The bell, which had seemed to mock him with its imperfection, now invited him to listen more deeply, to appreciate its full, complex song. The subtle dissonance was still there, a minor note in the grand symphony, but it no longer dictated the melody of his mind. Toru understood that the true suffering came not from the sound itself, but from his internal struggle against its reality, his mind's relentless pursuit of an idealized perfection, fueled by Trishna, a form of craving for things to be different. Dogen Zenji taught, "To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." Toru, by forgetting his preconceived notions of perfection and simply observing the bell's true nature, found a deeper understanding of his own mind. His experience with the bell was a living embodiment of the power of equanimous observation to transform not the external reality, but his internal relationship to it. As he prepares to present his unique bell to the world, his heart now imbued with a renewed sense of acceptance for the ebb and flow of all phenomena. Let us consider Maya, a sculptor, who learns to approach difficult sensations with a beginner's mind, observing pain as a sensation, not a failure. The sculptor's uncarved stone. Maya, a sculptor renowned for her ability to coax intricate forms from raw, unyielding stone, worked in a sun-drenched courtyard studio, the air perpetually thick with the fine dust of granite and marble. The rhythmic chip-chip-chip of her hammer and chisel was a constant companion, a meditative beat that marked the passage of her days. Her hands, strong and calloused, moved with a delicate power, guided by an inner vision that saw the finished form slumbering within the uncarved mass. The scent of mineral dust mingled with the faint, earthy aroma of the surrounding garden, creating an environment of focused creation, a space where the external world faded into the background. Today, Maya was engaged in a particularly demanding project, a large, abstract piece crafted from a block of exceptionally dense, dark basalt. Each strike required significant force, sending vibrations up her arms and through her body. As the hours wore on, a persistent ache began to settle in her forearms and wrists, a dull, throbbing sensation that intensified with every swing of the hammer. This was the first arrow, a direct, undeniable physical experience, a clear message from her muscles and joints protesting the sustained exertion. However, the physical discomfort was swiftly followed by a familiar surge of internal resistance and self-judgment. This is too hard. My hands are not strong enough. I should have chosen a softer stone. This pain is going to prevent me from finishing this piece, and it will be another failure. This internal narrative, a cascade of frustration, doubt, and self-criticism, began to weave a far more intricate and painful pattern than the simple sensation of muscular fatigue. Her mind, instead of remaining present with the task, spiraled into a future of imagined failures and shortcomings, transforming the raw experience of physical strain into a source of deep suffering, a mental weight far heavier than the basalt itself. Her jaw tightened, her shoulders hunched, and her breath became shallow, each subsequent strike feeling less like a deliberate act of creation and more like a battle against her own body. The suffering arose not from the ache itself, which was a natural consequence of intense physical labor, but from her mind's resistance to it, her craving for an effortless process, and her judgment of her own perceived limitations. She was battling not the stone, but her own expectation that the process should be free of discomfort, creating a self-imposed prison of critical thought that amplified the physical pain manifold. Maya remembered the teachings of her first mentor, an old stone carver named Hiroshi, whose eyes, though clouded with age, held a piercing clarity. Hiroshi had once told her, "Approach each stone as if it is the first you have ever touched, and the last you will ever touch. In that freshness, there is no failure, only discovery." At the time, Maya had understood this as a lesson in presence, but now, as the ache pulsed in her wrists, the words resonated with a deeper internal truth, hinting at a way to navigate not just the physical challenge, but the mental one of self-judgment. Taking a deep, deliberate breath, Maya consciously anchored her attention to the sensation in her forearms and wrists. She invited a beginner's mind, or shoshin, to her experience, approaching the ache without the preconceived notions of too hard or failure. She directed her full presence, her sati, towards the physical sensation. She noticed its warmth, its throbbing rhythm, its precise location. She observed that it was not a static, unchanging block of pain, but a dynamic, impermanent event, constantly shifting, ebbing and flowing, like the dust motes dancing in the sunlight, embodying the truth of anicca. With each mindful breath, Maya created a spaciousness, a small pocket of calm within the intense discomfort. The physical sensation remained undeniably present, but the frantic self-criticism, the fear of future failure, the mental suffering began to dissipate. She was no longer fighting the ache, but simply acknowledging it, allowing it to be, without needing it to be otherwise. This radical acceptance, this willingness to be present with what is, created a profound stillness around the pain, preventing it from consuming her entire being and allowing her to focus on the stone itself. Her breathing deepened, and a sense of calm returned to her, settling like the fine dust after a day's work. Her strikes became more deliberate, more integrated, and the form slowly began to emerge from the unyielding basalt. The ache was still there, a quiet companion, but it no longer held her captive in a prison of self-doubt. Maya understood that the true suffering came not from the physical strain, but from her internal struggle against it. Her mind's relentless pursuit of an idealized, pain-free process, fueled by Trishna, a form of craving for things to be different. Pema Chodron often speaks of leaning into the sharp edges of life, rather than resisting them. Maya, by leaning into the sharpness of her physical discomfort with a beginner's mind, found a deeper connection not only to her craft, but to her own inner resilience. Her experience with the uncarved stone was a living embodiment of the power of equanimous observation to transform not the external challenge, but her internal relationship to it. As she continues to shape the stubborn rock, her heart now imbued with a renewed sense of acceptance for the ebb and flow of all sensations. Let us consider Dr. Aris, an astronomer who grapples with a different kind of fading, discovering that the true source of his anguish lies not in the demise of a distant star, but in his mind's attachment to its perceived permanence. The astronomer's fading star. Dr. Aris, an astronomer whose life was dedicated to unraveling the cosmic tapestry, worked within the hushed sanctity of a mountaintop observatory. The air, crisp and thin, carried the scent of pine and distant snow, a stark contrast to the vast, silent expanse of the night sky that was his canvas. His days, or rather his nights, were spent in the gentle hum of advanced machinery, his gaze fixed on monitor screens that translated the faint whispers of light from distant galaxies into luminous data. He was a seeker of ultimate truths, a cartographer of the infinite, finding both profound beauty and humbling impermanence in the celestial ballet of creation and destruction. For decades, Dr. Aris had meticulously observed a particular star, a brilliant blue giant named Lyra Prime, located in a distant spiral arm. It was a star he had discovered in his youth, a beacon that had guided his early career, its steady brilliance a constant in the ever-shifting cosmic drama. He had charted its every pulsation, analyzed its spectral signature, and even named a newly discovered exoplanet orbiting it, feeling a deep, almost paternal connection to this distant celestial body, a silent companion across the vastness of space and time. One fateful night, as he sat hunched over his console, monitoring Lyra Prime, a series of anomalous readings began to flicker across his screen. The star's luminosity, which had been remarkably stable for centuries, showed a sudden, precipitous decline. Spectral analysis confirmed his gravest fears. Lyra Prime was undergoing a rapid, catastrophic collapse, the prelude to its inevitable supernova. This was the first arrow, a direct, objective scientific observation of a profound cosmic event, an undeniable fact of stellar evolution, a powerful reminder of anicca, the impermanence of all things. However, the objective data was swiftly followed by a familiar surge of profound sorrow and a clinging sense of personal loss. It cannot be, not Lyra Prime. All those years of observation, all that beauty, simply vanishing. It feels like losing an old friend. The universe should not be so fleeting, so destructive. Why? This internal narrative, a cascade of grief, resistance, and a deep sense of injustice, began to weave a far more intricate and painful pattern than the simple scientific observation. His mind, instead of merely processing the data, began to personalize the event, transforming the cosmic demise into a source of deep suffering, a mental weight far heavier than the star itself. His shoulders slumped, his eyes grew heavy, and a profound weariness settled over him. The star, which had been a symbol of constancy and wonder, now represented loss and the brutal indifference of the cosmos. His suffering arose not from the star's actual demise, which was a natural, inevitable process in the grand scheme of stellar life cycles, but from his mind's resistance to this fundamental truth, his craving for permanence, and his deep attachment to Lyra Prime as a personal emblem. He was battling not the universe, but his own expectation that beauty and meaning should endure unchanging, creating a self-imposed prison of sorrow that amplified the factual event manifold. Dr. Aris recalled the teachings of his grandmother, a woman of simple faith and profound wisdom, who had once told him during a childhood stargazing session, "Even the brightest fire eventually burns out, but its light travels on, creating new stories for new eyes. The sadness is only in wishing it would stay." At the time, he had understood this as a poetic sentiment, but now, as Lyra Prime's light faded on his screen, the words resonated with a deeper internal truth, hinting at a way to navigate not just the physical death of a star, but the mental one of letting go of attachment. Taking a deep, deliberate breath, Dr. Aris consciously anchored his attention to the raw data on his screens, to the objective process unfolding. He invited a sense of detachment, a non-attachment to the outcome, approaching the star's demise without the preconceived notions of tragedy or personal loss. He directed his full presence, his sati, towards the scientific observation. He noticed the precise curves on the light graph, the shifting spectral lines, the raw, undeniable evidence of transformation. He observed that the star was not a static, unchanging entity, but a dynamic, impermanent event, constantly shifting, ebbing and flowing, embodying the truth of sunyata or emptiness, from which new forms would eventually arise. With each mindful breath, Dr. Aris created a spaciousness, a small pocket of calm within the vast cosmic drama. The objective observation remained undeniably present, but the frantic grief, the clinging to what was, the mental suffering, began to dissipate. He was no longer fighting the star's fate, but simply acknowledging it, allowing it to be without needing it to be otherwise. This radical acceptance, this willingness to be present with what is, created a profound stillness around the event, preventing his personal attachment from consuming his entire being and allowing him to experience the full presence of the cosmic cycle. His breathing deepened, and a sense of calm returned to him, settling like the quiet dust of ancient stardust. The star, which had seemed to mock him with its impermanence, now invited him to observe the grander dance of the universe with a more open heart. The profound cosmic event was still there, a momentous note in the grand symphony, but it no longer dictated the melody of his mind. Dr. Aris understood that the true suffering came not from the star's natural demise, but from his internal struggle against it, his mind's relentless craving for permanence, fueled by Trishna, a form of clinging to what is inevitably transient. Buddha taught, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. Dr. Aris, by letting go of his attachment and resistance to impermanence, stopped burning himself with the hot coal of sorrow. His experience with the fading star was a living embodiment of the power of non-attachment to transform not the external event, but his internal relationship to it. As he continues to chart the mysteries of the cosmos, his heart now imbued with a renewed sense of equanimity for the ebb and flow of all phenomena, let us consider Hero, a potter, who grapples with a different kind of imperfection, discovering that the true source of his anguish lies not in a hairline crack, but in his mind's desire for an unattainable flawlessness. The potter's cracked vessel. Hero, a master potter whose hands shaped earth into objects of profound beauty and utility, worked in a serene studio bathed in the soft, diffused light of the morning sun. The air was cool and damp, carrying the earthy scent of clay, wood smoke from the kiln, and the faint, sweet perfume of blossoming jasmine from the courtyard garden. His wheel, a sturdy, worn companion, spun with a quiet hum, a meditative counterpoint to the gentle splash of water and the rhythmic shaping of the pliable material. For Hiro, each vessel was a dialogue between his hands and the earth, a tangible expression of presence and intention, a practice of deep concentration. He was particularly proud of his latest creation, a large, intricate vase, its surface adorned with delicate, hand-carved patterns reminiscent of ancient swirling winds. It had been a challenging piece, demanding weeks of focused effort, from the careful wedging of the clay to the slow, precise turning on the wheel, and finally, the meticulous firing in his wood-fired kiln. The vase represented the pinnacle of his current skill, a testament to his dedication, and he had envisioned it gracing the main altar of the local temple, a symbol of enduring beauty and contemplative peace. This morning, as he carefully removed the vase from the cooled kiln, his heart swelled with a quiet sense of accomplishment. He turned the vessel slowly in his hands, admiring its perfect symmetry, its rich, earthy glaze, its intricate details. But then, as the light caught a particular angle, his gaze snagged on a faint, almost invisible hairline crack that snaked subtly from the rim down one side. It was a tiny imperfection, barely discernible to the casual eye, yet to Hiro, it was a glaring flaw, a blemish on what he had believed to be perfect. This was the first arrow, a direct, undeniable observation of a physical imperfection. However, the objective observation was swiftly followed by a familiar surge of intense disappointment and self-reproach. A crack, after all that work, it's ruined. I am not good enough. This vase cannot go to the temple now. My reputation will be stained. This internal narrative, a cascade of judgment, frustration, and a deep sense of personal failure, began to weave a far more intricate and painful pattern than the simple hairline fissure. His mind, instead of merely acknowledging the crack, began to condemn it, transforming the minor imperfection into a source of deep suffering, a mental weight far heavier than the vase itself. His shoulders slumped, his jaw tightened, and a heavy sigh escaped his lips. The vase, which moments before had brought him such joy, now seemed to mock him with its perceived flaw. His suffering arose not from the crack itself, which was a natural, albeit undesired, outcome of the firing process, but from his mind's resistance to this reality, his craving for an unattainable perfection, and his judgment of his own craftsmanship. He was battling not the vase, but his own rigid idea of what a perfect vessel should be, creating a self-imposed prison of critical thought that amplified the physical flaw manifold. Hiro remembered the teachings of his old sensei, a Zen monk who often visited the pottery studio to observe his work. The monk, named Jiro, had once remarked, "The life of the clay is in its changing form, and in its breaking, it simply returns to the earth. To resist its nature is to resist our own." At the time, Hiro had understood this as a philosophical acceptance of impermanence, but now, as he gazed at the cracked vase, the words resonated with a deeper internal truth, hinting at a way to navigate not just the physical imperfection, but the mental one of attachment to an ideal. Taking a deep, deliberate breath, Hiro consciously anchored his attention to the precise sensation of disappointment in his chest, allowing his body to settle. He then directed his full presence, his sati, towards the crack itself. He noticed its delicate line, its subtle texture, how it followed the natural contours of the clay. He observed that it was not a static, unchanging blemish, but a part of the vase's unique story, a testament to the transformative power of fire and earth, embodying the truth of anicca, or impermanence, that all forms are subject to change. With each mindful breath, Hiro created a spaciousness, a small pocket of calm within the intense disappointment. The physical crack remained, undeniably present, but the frantic self-criticism, the fear of failure, the mental suffering, began to dissipate. He was no longer fighting the vase's reality, but simply acknowledging it, allowing it to be, without needing it to be otherwise. This radical acceptance, this willingness to be present with what is, created a profound stillness around the perceived flaw, preventing it from consuming his entire being and allowing him to experience the full presence of the vessel, crack and all. His breathing deepened and a sense of calm returned to him, settling like the cool air of the morning. The vase, which had seemed to mock him with its imperfection, now invited him to see it with new eyes, to appreciate its full complex beauty, including its unique mark. The hairline crack was still there, a minor note in the grand symphony, but it no longer dictated the melody of his mind. Hiro understood that the true suffering came not from the physical flaw, but from his internal struggle against it, his mind's relentless pursuit of an idealized perfection, fueled by Trishna, a form of craving for things to be different than they are. Jack Cornfield often teaches that the things that go wrong often make the best stories. Hiro, by embracing the story of the cracked vase, found a deeper understanding of acceptance and the beauty of imperfection. His experience with the cracked vessel was a living embodiment of the power of non-attachment to transform not the external event, but his internal relationship to it. As he considers how this unique vase might still offer a lesson, perhaps not on the temple altar, but in his own home as a reminder of wisdom, his heart now imbued with a renewed sense of equanimity for the ebb and flow of all phenomena, let us consider Freya, a gardener who grapples with a different kind of fading, discovering that the true source of her anguish lies not in a wilted bloom, but in her mind's longing for it to remain vibrant. The gardener's wilted bloom. Freya, a gardener whose hands possessed an almost magical ability to coax life from the soil, tended a vibrant, sprawling garden that was her sanctuary and her life's work. The air, rich with the scent of damp earth, blossoming flowers, and the buzzing of industrious bees, was a symphony of natural life. Her days were spent amidst the rustling leaves, the gentle sway of tall grasses, and the riot of colour that shifted with the seasons. For Freya, the garden was a living canvas, a testament to the cycles of growth, decay, and renewal, a place where she felt deeply connected to the natural flow of existence, embodying a profound spaciousness within her daily tasks. Among her many botanical treasures, one particular flower, a rare and exquisite orchid with petals like spun moonlight, held a special place in her heart. She had nurtured it from a tiny seedling, protecting it from harsh winds and scorching sun, carefully providing the precise conditions for its delicate bloom. The orchid represented years of patient care, a symbol of her dedication and a source of immense joy whenever its ethereal blossoms unfurled, their subtle perfume a whisper of quiet beauty in the heart of her garden. This morning, as Freya made her rounds, a familiar sense of anticipation guiding her steps, she approached the orchid's special corner. Her heart, which moments before had been light with expectation, tightened with a sudden sharp pang. The exquisite bloom, which had graced her garden with its perfect beauty just yesterday, had wilted overnight. Its petals, once vibrant and firm, now hung limp and discolored, a stark contrast to the lively green of its leaves. This was the first arrow, a direct, undeniable observation of a natural, yet disheartening change. However, the objective observation was swiftly followed by a familiar surge of profound sorrow and a clinging sense of personal loss. No, it can't be. Not my beautiful orchid. Why did it have to die so soon? All that effort, wasted. The garden feels less bright now. This is so unfair. This internal narrative, a cascade of grief, resistance, and a deep sense of personal attachment, began to weave a far more intricate and painful pattern than the simple fact of the flower's natural decline. Her mind, instead of merely acknowledging the wilted bloom, began to condemn its impermanence, transforming the natural event into a source of deep suffering, a mental weight far heavier than the delicate flower itself. Her shoulders slumped, her eyes grew heavy, and a profound weariness settled over her. The orchid, which had been a symbol of vibrant life, now represented loss and the fleeting nature of all beauty. Her suffering arose not from the flower's actual wilting, which was an inevitable part of its life cycle, but from her mind's resistance to this fundamental truth, her craving, or trishna, for its continued vibrancy, and her deep attachment to it as a personal source of joy. She was battling not the plant, but her own expectation that beauty should endure unchanging, creating a self-imposed prison of sorrow that amplified the factual event manifold. Freya remembered the teachings of her grandmother, a woman whose hands were as wise as the earth itself. Her grandmother had often said, "The garden teaches us that nothing lasts and everything changes. To love a flower is to love its coming and its going, not just its bloom." At the time, Freya had understood this as a philosophical acceptance of the seasons. But now, as she gazed at the wilted orchid, the words resonated with a deeper internal truth, hinting at a way to navigate not just the physical death of a flower, but the mental one of letting go of attachment to a particular state. Taking a deep, deliberate breath, Freya consciously anchored her attention to the raw sensation of sadness in her chest, allowing her body to settle. She then directed her full presence, her sati, towards the wilted bloom itself. She noticed its softened texture, the subtle shift in color, the way it still held a fragile beauty even in its decline. She observed that it was not a static, unchanging symbol of loss, but a dynamic, impermanent event, constantly shifting, ebbing, and flowing, returning its nutrients to the soil, embodying the truth of sunyata, or emptiness, from which new life would eventually arise. With each mindful breath, Freya created a spaciousness, a small pocket of calm within the intense disappointment. The physical wilt remained, undeniably present, but the frantic grief, the clinging to what was, the mental suffering began to dissipate. She was no longer fighting the flower's fate, but simply acknowledging it, allowing it to be, without needing it to be otherwise. This radical acceptance, this willingness to be present with what is, created a profound stillness around the event, preventing her personal attachment from consuming her entire being and allowing her to experience the full presence of the garden's cycles. Her breathing deepened, and a sense of calm returned to her, settling like the gentle dew of morning. The garden, which had seemed to mock her with its impermanence, now invited her to observe the grander dance of life and death with a more open heart. The wilted bloom was still there, a poignant note in the grand symphony, but it no longer dictated the melody of her mind. Freya understood that the true suffering came not from the flower's natural demise, but from her internal struggle against it, her mind's relentless craving for permanence, fueled by Trishna, a form of clinging to what is inevitably transient. Buddha taught, the root of suffering is attachment. Freya, by letting go of her attachment to the orchid's vibrant bloom, found a deeper understanding of contentment and the beauty of natural flow. Her experience with the wilted bloom was a living embodiment of the power of non-attachment to transform not the external event, but her internal relationship to it. As she continues to nurture her garden, her heart now imbued with a renewed sense of equanimity for the ebb and flow of all phenomena, let us consider Captain Leaf, a sailor who grapples with a different kind of change, discovering that the true source of his agitation lies not in a choppy sea, but in his mind's resistance to the shifting tide, wishing for calm instead of skillfully adjusting his sails. The sailor's shifting tide. Captain Leif, a seasoned sailor whose life was inextricably woven with the rhythms of the sea, commanded a sturdy fishing vessel named the North Star. His days were spent under the vast, ever-changing dome of the sky, the air thick with the invigorating scent of salt spray, diesel fuel, and the fresh catch of the day. The constant rocking of the deck beneath his feet was as natural as his own heartbeat, and the ceaseless murmur of the ocean, a blend of gentle lapping and powerful surges, was the soundtrack to his existence. For Leif, the sea was both a provider and a demanding teacher, a vast, dynamic force that commanded respect and an unwavering presence. He prided himself on his ability to read the ocean's moods, to anticipate squalls, and to navigate treacherous currents with a calm, unwavering hand. He understood that the sea was a force of constant change, an embodiment of Anika, and that a sailor's skill lay not in wishing for calm, but in adapting to whatever conditions arose. Yet even after decades, there were moments when the sheer unpredictability of the ocean, particularly the relentless choppy seas that could turn a routine journey into a grueling test, would challenge his equanimity and stir a deep-seated frustration. Today, Leif was guiding his vessel through a notorious strait known for its volatile currents, a passage that demanded utmost concentration. The weather, which had been fair that morning, had quickly deteriorated. The wind had picked up, churning the surface into a chaotic expanse of whitecaps, sending spray high over the bow. The boat pitched and rolled, each wave a jarring impact against the hull, demanding constant adjustments to the rudder and sails. This was the first arrow, a direct, undeniable physical experience of the rough sea, a challenging reality for both vessel and crew. However, the physical challenge was swiftly followed by a familiar surge of irritation and a clinging sense of personal grievance. This is unbearable. Why can't it just be calm? This always happens when we're trying to make good time. This choppy water is going to exhaust the crew and damage the nets. It's so unfair. This internal narrative, a cascade of complaint, resistance, and a deep sense of frustration, began to weave a far more intricate and painful pattern than the simple reality of the rough waves. His mind, instead of merely responding to the conditions, began to condemn them, transforming the natural state of the sea into a source of deep suffering, a mental storm far more consuming than the actual tempest. His jaw tightened, his grip on the wheel became almost painfully rigid, and his breath grew shallow. The ocean, which had been a partner, now felt like an adversary, actively working against him. His suffering arose not from the choppy sea itself, which was simply an expression of natural forces, but from his mind's resistance to its reality, his craving, or trishna, for a smoother passage, and his judgment of the present conditions as bad. He was battling not the waves, but his own expectation that the journey should be effortless, creating a self-imposed prison of agitation that amplified the physical discomfort manifold. Leif remembered the teachings of his old mentor, a stoic, weathered fisherman named Bjorn, who had once told him, "You cannot calm the storm, but you can calm yourself. The ocean does not care for your wishes, only for your skill." At the time, Leif had understood this as a practical lesson in seamanship, but now, as the waves crashed against his hull, the words resonated with a deeper internal truth, hinting at a way to navigate not just the physical turbulence, but the mental one of resistance and aversion. Taking a deep, deliberate breath, Leif consciously anchored his attention to the sensation of the boat's movement beneath his feet, allowing his body to settle into the rhythm of the waves rather than fighting against it. He directed his full presence, his sati, towards the physical experience of the choppy sea. He noticed the rise and fall of the bow, the spray on his face, the sound of the wind in the rigging. He observed that the sea was not a static, unchanging entity of choppiness, but a dynamic, impermanent event, constantly shifting, ebbing, and flowing. Each wave a unique expression of the ocean's vast energy, embodying the truth of sunyata, or emptiness, from which all forms arise and return. With each mindful breath, Leif created a spaciousness, a small pocket of calm within the intense physical challenge. The choppy conditions remained, undeniably present, but the frantic irritation, the clinging to a desire for calm, the mental suffering, began to dissipate. He was no longer fighting the sea's reality, but simply acknowledging it, allowing it to be, without needing it to be otherwise. This radical acceptance, this willingness to be present with what is, created a profound stillness around the discomfort, preventing his personal aversion from consuming his entire being and allowing him to respond with greater skill and presence. His breathing deepened and a sense of calm returned to him, settling like the quiet after a squall. The ocean, which had seemed to mock him with its unpredictability, now invited him to engage with its raw power with a more open heart and a clearer mind. The choppy sea was still there, a challenging note in the grand symphony, but it no longer dictated the melody of his mind. Leif understood that the true suffering came not from the sea's natural state, but from his internal struggle against it, his mind's relentless craving for conditions to be different, fueled by trishna, a form of clinging to what is inevitably transient. Buddha taught, "It is your resistance to what is that causes your suffering." Captain Leif, by letting go of his resistance to the choppy sea, found a deeper understanding of equanimity and the wisdom of natural flow. His experience with the shifting tide was a living embodiment of the power of non-attachment to transform not the external event, but his internal relationship to it, as he continues to skillfully guide his vessel through the ever-changing waters. His heart now imbued with a renewed sense of acceptance for the ebb and flow of all phenomena. Let us consider Ren, a calligrapher, who grapples with a different kind of imperfection, discovering that the true source of his anguish lies not in a slight tremor in a crucial character, but in his mind's judgment of his own hand, wishing for an unattainable flawlessness. The calligrapher's imperfect stroke. Ren, a master calligrapher whose brushstrokes were said to capture the very essence of silence and movement, worked in a tranquil studio overlooking a quiet bamboo grove, The air, still and cool, carried the faint, sweet scent of ink and aged paper, punctuated by the gentle rustle of bamboo leaves in the breeze. His days were spent in deep concentration, his body poised, his breath steady, as he guided his brush across the pristine rice paper, each stroke a deliberate act of full presence, a meditation in motion. For Ren, calligraphy was not merely an art form, but a rigorous spiritual practice, a path to embodying inner peace and perfect concentration. He was currently engaged in a highly significant task, transcribing a sacred sutra for the opening of a new meditation hall. This particular passage contained a complex character, one that required an incredibly precise, unbroken vertical stroke, a single, unwavering line that symbolized the path to liberation. Ren had practiced this character countless times, striving for an almost superhuman flawlessness, believing that the purity of the stroke reflected the purity of his own mind, a pursuit of samadhi, or deep concentration. This morning, as he approached the crucial character, his mind was clear, his hands steady. He inhaled deeply, held his breath for a moment, and with a single fluid motion, brought the brush down onto the paper. The initial part of the stroke was perfect, a testament to years of practice. But then, almost imperceptibly, a tiny tremor, a minute waver, manifested near the bottom of the line, creating a slight, almost invisible deviation from absolute straightness. It was a minuscule imperfection, barely discernible to the untrained eye, yet to Ren, it was a glaring flaw, a blemish on what he had believed to be perfect. This was the first arrow, a direct, undeniable observation of a physical imperfection. However, the objective observation was swiftly followed by a familiar surge of intense disappointment and self-reproach. A tremor. My hand failed me. It's ruined. This sutra cannot be presented now. My concentration is clearly not pure enough. All my efforts blemished by this single, imperfect stroke. This internal narrative, a cascade of judgment, frustration, and a deep sense of personal failure, began to weave a far more intricate and painful pattern than the simple hairline waver. His mind, instead of merely acknowledging the tremor, began to condemn it, transforming the minor imperfection into a source of deep suffering, a mental weight far heavier than the delicate brushstroke itself. His shoulders hunched, his jaw tightened, and a heavy sigh escaped his lips. The character, which moments before had held such promise, now seemed to mock him with its perceived flaw. His suffering arose not from the tremor itself, which was a natural, albeit undesired outcome of human physiology, but from his mind's resistance to this reality, his craving, or trishna, for an unattainable perfection, and his judgment of his own perceived lack of flawlessness. He was battling not the stroke, but his own rigid idea of what a perfect calligrapher should be, creating a self-imposed prison of critical thought that amplified the physical flaw manifold. Ren remembered the teachings of his Zen master, a gentle, wise woman named Akiko, whose calligraphy, though sometimes imperfect, radiated profound peace. Akiko had once told him, "The brush moves with the hand, and the hand moves with the breath. To resist the breath's subtle dance is to resist the very life in your stroke." Perfection is not in the absence of tremor, but in the acceptance of its presence. At the time, Ren had understood this as a poetic acceptance of natural variation, but now, as he gazed at the imperfect stroke, the words resonated with a deeper internal truth, hinting at a way to navigate not just the physical imperfection, but the mental one of attachment to an ideal. Taking a deep, deliberate breath, Ren consciously anchored his attention to the precise sensation of disappointment in his chest, allowing his body to settle. He then directed his full presence, his sati, towards the tremor itself. He noticed its delicate curve, its subtle texture, how it subtly altered the line. He observed that it was not a static, unchanging blemish, but a part of the character's unique expression, a testament to the living, breathing hand that had created it, embodying the truth of anicca, or impermanence, that all forms are subject to change, even the most precise. With each mindful breath, Ren created a spaciousness, a small pocket of calm within the intense disappointment. The physical tremor remained undeniably present, but the frantic self-criticism, the fear of failure, the mental suffering began to dissipate. He was no longer fighting the stroke's reality, but simply acknowledging it, allowing it to be without needing it to be otherwise. This radical acceptance, this willingness to be present with what is, created a profound stillness around the perceived flaw, preventing it from consuming his entire being and allowing him to experience the full presence of the character, tremor, and awe. His breathing deepened, and a sense of calm returned to him, settling like the quiet after a focused meditation. The character, which had seemed to mock him with its imperfection, now invited him to see it with new eyes, to appreciate its full, complex beauty, including its unique mark of human touch. The slight tremor was still there, a minor note in the grand symphony, but it no longer dictated the melody of his mind. Ren understood that the true suffering came not from the physical flaw, but from his internal struggle against it, his mind's relentless pursuit of an idealized perfection, fueled by Trishna, a form of clinging to what is inevitably transient. Thich Nhat Hanh often teaches that there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way. Ren, by accepting the imperfect stroke as part of the way, found a deeper understanding of inner peace and the beauty of authenticity. His experience with the imperfect stroke was a living embodiment of the power of radical acceptance to transform not the external event, but his internal relationship to it. As he considers how this unique sutra might still offer a profound lesson, perhaps not on the altar, but in his own heart, his heart now imbued with a renewed sense of equanimity for the ebb and flow of all phenomena, let us consider Kale, a blacksmith who grapples with a different kind of pain, discovering that the true source of his suffering lies not in a burn, but in his mind's dwelling on what he should have done. The blacksmith's cooling iron. Kale, a blacksmith whose forge was a symphony of fire, steel, and muscle, worked in a cavernous workshop that smelled of coal smoke, hot metal, and the earthy tang of quenching water. The rhythmic clang of his hammer against the anvil was a constant, powerful beat, a primal pulse that echoed through the stone walls, creating an atmosphere of intense, focused labor. His face, often streaked with soot and beaded with sweat, bore the marks of his demanding craft, his eyes reflecting the mesmerizing dance of the roaring fire. For Kale, blacksmithing was more than a trade. It was a visceral connection to the elements, a practice of shaping raw power into purposeful form, embodying a profound groundedness in his physical presence. He prided himself on his meticulous attention to safety, understanding the inherent dangers of working with incandescent metal. Every tool had its place, every movement was calculated, every piece of glowing iron handled with utmost respect. Yet, in the fast-paced, demanding environment of the forge, accidents, though rare, were an undeniable possibility, a stark reminder of the impermanence of physical comfort and the ever-present potential for anicca. Kale had learned to be vigilant, to cultivate a sharp, observing awareness of his surroundings. One sweltering afternoon, as he was shaping a particularly stubborn piece of steel, pulling it from the intense heat of the forge, his gloved hand slipped. The red-hot metal, still glowing fiercely, brushed against his bare forearm for a fleeting instant. A searing, blinding pain shot through him, a sharp, immediate shock that forced a guttural cry from his lips. He instinctively dropped the iron and plunged his arm into a bucket of cool water. The hiss of steam, a stark punctuation to the sudden agony. This was the first arrow, a direct, undeniable physical experience, acute and undeniable. However, even as the initial searing pain began to subside under the cool water, a familiar surge of self-recrimination and mental replay began. How could I be so careless? I know better than this. I should have worn a longer sleeve. Now I'll be out of commission and the work will pile up. This was entirely my fault, a stupid mistake. This internal narrative, a cascade of regret, blame, and a relentless replaying of the incident, began to weave a far more intricate and painful pattern than the simple physical burn. His mind, instead of merely acknowledging the injury and the soothing effect of the water, began to condemn the past, transforming the raw experience of pain into a source of deep suffering, a mental loop far more agonizing than the healing wound. His jaw tightened, his shoulders hunched, and his breath became shallow, even as the physical throbbing in his arm began to ease. The burn, which was now a manageable discomfort, became magnified by his mind's relentless dwelling on what should have been, his craving or trishna for a different past. He was battling not the injury, but his own inability to let go of the event, to accept its occurrence, creating a self-imposed prison of regret and self-blame that amplified the physical pain manifold, extending its duration far beyond the initial contact. Kale remembered the teachings of his old master, a wise and silent smith named Haru, whose hands, though scarred, moved with an almost ethereal calm. Haru had once told him, "The iron cools, and the shape is made. To keep hammering at what is already formed, or to regret a spark that has already flown, is to waste your strength. Let the fire of the past cool and tend to the present heat." At the time, Kale had understood this as a practical lesson in efficiency, but now, as he nursed his arm, the words resonated with a deeper internal truth, hinting at a way to navigate not just the physical injury, but the mental one of clinging to the past. Taking a deep, deliberate breath, Kale consciously anchored his attention to the sensation of the cool water on his arm. Allowing his body to settle, he then directed his full presence, his sati, towards the physical throbbing of the burn. He noticed its warmth, its pulsing rhythm, its precise location. He observed that it was not a static, unchanging block of pain, but a dynamic, impermanent event, constantly shifting, ebbing and flowing, slowly fading with the cooling water, embodying the truth of sunyata, or emptiness, from which all sensations arise and return. With each mindful breath, Kale created a spaciousness, a small pocket of calm within the intense discomfort. The physical burn remained, undeniably present, but the frantic self-recrimination, the clinging to the past mistake, the mental suffering, began to dissipate. He was no longer fighting the reality of the accident, but simply acknowledging it, allowing it to be, without needing it to be otherwise. This radical acceptance, this willingness to be present with what is, created a profound stillness around the pain, preventing his personal attachment to a different past from consuming his entire being and allowing him to focus on the process of healing. His breathing deepened, and a sense of calm returned to him, settling like the quiet after the last hammer blow. The burn, which had seemed to mock him with its reminder of his carelessness, now invited him to observe the process of healing with a more open heart and a clearer mind. The physical pain was still there, a poignant note in the grand symphony, but it no longer dictated the melody of his mind. Kale understood that the true suffering came not from the physical injury, but from his internal struggle against it. His mind's relentless dwelling on what should have been, fueled by Trishna, a form of clinging to what is inevitably transient and unchangeable. Buddha taught, "Do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future, concentrate the mind on the present moment." Kale, by letting go of his mental replay of the accident, found a deeper understanding of presence and the wisdom of acceptance. His experience with the cooling iron was a living embodiment of the power of letting go to transform not the external event, but his internal relationship to it. As he tends to his healing arm, his heart now imbued with a renewed sense of equanimity for the ebb and flow of all phenomena, let us consider Lyra, a seeker of ancient texts who grapples with a different kind of void, discovering that the true source of her anguish lies not in an unanswered question, but in her mind's relentless pressure to find a definitive answer rather than resting in the journey. The seeker's unanswered question. Lyra, a scholar and seeker whose life was a tireless quest for knowledge, spent her days immersed in the dusty archives of ancient libraries and the hushed halls of forgotten monasteries. The air, thick with the scent of old paper, leather-bound books, and the faint, sweet aroma of beeswax candles, was her natural habitat. Her fingers, stained with ink and worn from turning countless pages, moved with a delicate reverence, tracing the faded script of long-dead scribes. For Lyra, every text was a potential key, every fragment a piece of a grander puzzle, a path to understanding the deeper truths of existence, embodying a profound intentionality in her pursuit. For many years, Lyra had been consumed by the search for a legendary manuscript, a text rumored to contain the definitive explanation of the original mind, a concept central to the ancient philosophical traditions she studied. She believed that finding this manuscript would unlock all remaining mysteries, providing a complete and perfect understanding that would finally bring her intellectual quest to a satisfying conclusion. She had traveled across continents, deciphered obscure languages, and followed the faintest of historical breadcrumbs, driven by an insatiable thirst for this ultimate answer. Today, she found herself in a remote, windswept monastery, nestled high in a desolate mountain range, its ancient stone walls whispering tales of centuries past. She had followed a particularly promising lead, a cryptic reference in a forgotten scroll. After days of painstaking search through crumbling texts and hidden alcoves, she finally located a small, unassuming box, its contents carefully wrapped in silk. Her heart pounded with anticipation. She unwrapped the bundle to find not the definitive manuscript, but a single, blank scroll, pristine and untouched, bearing no words, no answers, only an elegant, empty space. This was the first arrow, a direct, undeniable observation of absence, of an unanswered question. However, the objective observation was swiftly followed by a familiar surge of intense disappointment and a clinging sense of personal failure. Blank? After all this time, all this effort? It's meaningless. My entire quest has been for nothing. I am no closer to the truth. This is a cruel joke, a waste of my life. This internal narrative, a cascade of frustration, despair, and a deep sense of personal futility, began to weave a far more intricate and painful pattern than the simple fact of the empty scroll. Her mind, instead of merely acknowledging the absence of the expected answer, began to condemn it, transforming the raw experience of not knowing into a source of deep suffering, a mental void far more consuming than the blank paper itself. Her shoulders slumped, her eyes grew heavy, and a profound weariness settled over her, deeper than any physical exhaustion. The blank scroll, which moments before had held such promise, now seemed to mock her with its silence. Her suffering arose not from the absence of the definitive answer itself, which was simply a reality of the search, but from her mind's resistance to this reality, her craving, or trishna, for a complete and final understanding, and her deep attachment to the idea of a singular, ultimate truth. She was battling not the blankness, but her own expectation that life's profound questions should always have clear, definitive answers, creating a self-imposed prison of intellectual anguish that amplified the factual event manifold. Lyra remembered the teachings of an old Zen master she had briefly encountered in her youth, a woman named Sora, whose eyes held the vastness of the sky. Sora had once told her, "The deepest wisdom is found not in filling the empty spaces, but in learning to dwell peacefully within them. The question itself is often the answer." At the time, Lyra had dismissed this as too abstract, but now, as she stared at the blank scroll, the words resonated with a deeper, internal truth, hinting at a way to navigate not just the intellectual void, but the mental one of needing to know. Taking a deep, deliberate breath, Lyra consciously anchored her attention to the raw sensation of disappointment in her chest, allowing her body to settle. She then directed her full presence, her sati, towards the blank scroll itself. She noticed its pristine surface, the subtle texture of the silk, the way it simply was, without demanding interpretation or explanation. She observed that the blankness was not a static, unchanging symbol of failure, but a dynamic, impermanent space, constantly inviting a fresh perspective, embodying the truth of sunyata, or emptiness, which is full of potential, not lack. With each mindful breath, Lyra created a spaciousness, a small pocket of calm within the intense frustration. The blank scroll remained, undeniably present, but the frantic intellectual struggle, the clinging to the need for an answer, the mental suffering, began to dissipate. She was no longer fighting the reality of the unanswered question, but simply acknowledging it, allowing it to be, without needing it to be otherwise. This radical acceptance, this willingness to be present with what is, created a profound stillness around the void, preventing her personal attachment to a definitive truth from consuming her entire being and allowing her to experience the full presence of the journey itself. Her breathing deepened and a sense of calm returned to her, settling like the quiet dust on ancient texts. The blank scroll, which had seemed to mock her with its silence, now invited her to understand that the true wisdom lay not in a final answer, but in the boundless potential of not knowing, in the beginner's mind, or shoshin, that sees endless possibilities in every moment. The unanswered question was still there, a profound note in the grand symphony of existence, but it no longer dictated the melody of her mind. Lyra understood that the true suffering came not from the absence of a definitive answer, but from her internal struggle against it, her mind's relentless craving for certainty, fueled by trishna, a form of clinging to what is inevitably elusive. Alan Watts often spoke of the futility of trying to grasp it, when it is the very nature of reality itself. Lyra, by letting go of her grasping for the ultimate answer, found a deeper understanding of wisdom and the peace of the journey. Her experience with the blank scroll was a living embodiment of the power of non-attachment to transform not the external event, but her internal relationship to it. As she continues her scholarly pursuits, her heart now imbued with a renewed sense of equanimity for the ebb and flow of all phenomena, let us consider Eiji, a composer who grapples with a different kind of dissonance, discovering that the true source of his anguish lies not in a jarring chord, but in his mind's identification with the bad sound, believing it reflects on his own worth as an artist. The composer's dissonant chord. Eiji, a composer whose symphonies painted vivid soundscapes of emotion and contemplation, worked in a quiet studio filled with the rich, resonant tones of his grand piano and the rustling of countless scores. The air, often heavy with the scent of old paper and the lingering fragrance of his morning tea, hummed with unheard melodies and complex harmonies. His fingers, nimble and expressive, danced across the keys, translating the intricate architecture of his inner world into tangible sound. For Eiji, music was a profound expression of the human spirit, a path to self-knowledge and an exploration of the vast landscape of awareness, embodying a deep intentionality in his creative process. He was currently immersed in a new composition, a piece intended to evoke the subtle interplay of light and shadow, a delicate balance of tension and resolution. He meticulously crafted each note, each phrase, each chord, striving for an organic flow, a seamless integration of sound that would guide the listener through a journey of profound stillness and vibrant expression. His ear was exceptionally keen, attuned to the most minute nuances of pitch and timbre, always seeking the perfect resonance, the ideal emotional weight for every passage. This afternoon, as he played through a particularly complex section, layering string arrangements over a woodwind melody, a jarring, unexpected chord erupted from the piano. It was a harsh, dissonant cluster of notes, a stark interruption to the delicate harmony he was building, like a sudden shout in a quiet contemplation. He winced, his fingers recoiling from the keys. This was the first arrow, a direct, undeniable auditory sensation, a sound that was objectively discordant within the established musical framework he had created. However, the objective sound was swiftly followed by a familiar surge of intense self-criticism and personal identification. That's awful. What was I thinking? This chord ruins the entire piece. It sounds amateurish, a clear sign of my failing creativity. I am losing my touch. This is a failure of my artistic vision. This internal narrative, a cascade of judgment, despair, and a deep sense of personal inadequacy, began to weave a far more intricate and painful pattern than the simple auditory event. His mind, instead of merely acknowledging the sound, began to condemn it, transforming the jarring chord into a source of deep suffering, a mental cacophony far more consuming than the notes themselves. His shoulders hunched, his jaw tightened, and a heavy sigh escaped his lips. The music, which moments before had filled him with inspiration, now seemed to mock him with its perceived flaw. His suffering arose not from the chord itself, which was simply a combination of frequencies, but from his mind's resistance to its reality, his craving, or trishna, for an unattainable perfection, and his deep identification with the bad sound as a reflection of his own worth as an artist. He was battling not the music, but his own rigid idea of what a perfect composer should create, creating a self-imposed prison of critical thought that amplified the auditory discomfort manifold. Eiji remembered the teachings of his old composition master, a wizened but playful man named Hiroshi, who often encouraged his students to explore the boundaries of sound. Hiroshi had once told him, "A dissonant chord is not a mistake, Eiji, unless you cling to its discord. It is merely a moment of tension, inviting resolution, or perhaps a new kind of beauty. Listen without labeling, and you will hear more than just notes." At the time, Eiji had understood this as a technical lesson in musical theory. But now, as the jarring chord echoed in his mind, the words resonated with a deeper internal truth, hinting at a way to navigate not just the musical imperfection, but the mental one of judgment and self-identification. Taking a deep, deliberate breath, Eiji consciously anchored his attention to the raw sensation of disappointment in his chest, allowing his body to settle. He then directed his full presence, his sati, towards the sound of the chord itself. He replayed it in his mind, not with judgment, but with an observing awareness. He noticed its precise frequencies, its unique texture, the way its vibrations interacted. He observed that it was not a static, unchanging bad sound, but a dynamic, impermanent event, constantly shifting, ebbing and flowing, its resonance slowly decaying into silence, embodying the truth of sunyata, or emptiness, from which all sounds arise and return. With each mindful breath, Eiji created a spaciousness, a small pocket of calm within the intense discomfort. The physical sound remained undeniably present, but the frantic self-criticism, the clinging to the idea of failure, the mental suffering began to dissipate. He was no longer fighting the chord's reality, but simply acknowledging it, allowing it to be without needing it to be otherwise. This radical acceptance, this willingness to be present with what is, created a profound stillness around the perceived flaw, preventing his personal identification with it from consuming his entire being and allowing him to experience the full presence of the music, dissonance and all. His breathing deepened and a sense of calm returned to him, settling like the quiet after a final resonant chord. The music, which had seemed to mock him with its imperfection, now invited him to listen more deeply, to appreciate its full, complex song, including its moments of tension. The jarring chord was still there, a powerful note in the grand symphony, but it no longer dictated the melody of his mind. Eiji understood that the true suffering came not from the auditory dissonance, but from his internal struggle against it, his mind's relentless pursuit of an idealized perfection, fueled by Trishna, a form of clinging to what is inevitably transient and imperfect. Shunryu Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." Eiji, by accepting the imperfect chord as part of his creative process, found a deeper understanding of self-compassion and the beauty of evolution. His experience with the dissonant chord was a living embodiment of the power of observing awareness to transform not the external event, but his internal relationship to it. As he returns to his composition, his heart now imbued with a renewed sense of equanimity for the ebb and flow of all phenomena, let us consider Anya, a sentinel, who grapples with a different kind of discomfort, discovering that the true source of her anguish lies not in a cold night, but in her mind's longing for a warm bed, creating a longing that amplifies her physical experience. The sentinel's vigil. Anya, a sentinel whose duty was to guard the ancient city walls, spent her nights under the vast star-strewn sky, a silent witness to the world's slumber. The air, often sharp with the bite of frost or heavy with the dampness of an approaching storm, carried the distant sounds of nocturnal creatures and the occasional whisper of the wind through the battlements. Her posture, though relaxed, held an unwavering readiness, her eyes scanning the horizon, her senses acutely tuned to every subtle shift in her surroundings. For Anya, the vigil was more than a task. It was a profound practice of full presence, a deep embodiment of mindfulness, or sati, where every moment was met with alert awareness. She understood that her role demanded endurance, a capacity to remain present and alert regardless of external conditions. The cold, the wind, the long hours of stillness. These were inherent aspects of her duty, elements she had learned to accept as part of the job. Yet, even after years of service, there were moments when the sheer intensity of the elements, particularly the deep, penetrating chill of a winter night, would challenge her resolve and stir a familiar yearning for comfort, threatening to pull her mind away from her crucial post. Tonight, a biting wind whipped across the high walls, carrying with it the icy breath of the distant northern peaks. The temperature had plummeted, and despite her thick wool cloak, the cold seeped into her bones, chilling her fingers and toes and stiffening her muscles. A shiver ran through her, an undeniable physical sensation of deep cold that made her teeth subtly chatter. This was the first arrow, a direct, undeniable physical experience, acute and insistent. Her body's natural response was to contract, to seek warmth, to resist the discomfort, to long for immediate relief from the penetrating chill. However, the physical discomfort was swiftly followed by a familiar surge of internal complaint and a clinging sense of longing. This is unbearable. I wish I were by a warm fire, wrapped in blankets. My bed is so soft and cozy right now. Why must I stand here freezing? This is so uncomfortable I can't focus. Well, this internal narrative, a cascade of desire, resistance, and a deep sense of self-pity, began to weave a far more intricate and painful pattern than the simple sensation of cold. Her mind, instead of merely acknowledging the chill, began to condemn it, transforming the natural state of the night into a source of deep suffering, a mental yearning far more consuming than the actual temperature. Her shoulders hunched further, her jaw tightened, and her breath became shallow, even as she tried to pull her cloak tighter. The cold, which was a constant, predictable element of the winter vigil, became magnified by her mind's relentless dwelling on what should be, her craving, or trishna, for warmth and comfort. She was battling not the external temperature, but her own expectation that her experience should be pleasurable, creating a self-imposed prison of longing that amplified the physical discomfort manifold, extending its duration far beyond the initial contact. Anya remembered the teachings of her first commander, a seasoned veteran named Kaito, whose presence on the walls was always one of unwavering calm. Kaito had once told her, "The cold is just cold. It is your mind that makes it miserable by wishing it were not so. Breathe with the cold, and you will find warmth even in its heart." At the time, Anya had understood this as a stoic endurance, but now, as the chill pressed in on her, the words resonated with a deeper internal truth, hinting at a way to navigate not just the physical cold, but the mental one of craving and aversion. Taking a deep, deliberate breath, Anya consciously anchored her attention to the sensation of the cold itself, allowing her body to settle into the reality of the night rather than fighting against it. She directed her full presence, her anapanasati, towards the physical experience of the chill. She noticed its edges, its depth, its tingling sensation in her fingers and toes. She observed that it was not a static, unchanging block of misery, but a dynamic, impermanent event, constantly shifting, ebbing, and flowing, sometimes sharpening, sometimes dulling, embodying the truth of sunyata, or emptiness, from which all sensations arise and return. With each mindful breath, Anya created a spaciousness, a small pocket of calm within the intense discomfort. The physical cold remained, undeniably present, but the frantic longing for warmth, the clinging to a desire for comfort, the mental suffering, began to dissipate. She was no longer fighting the night's reality, but simply acknowledging it, allowing it to be, without needing it to be otherwise. This radical acceptance, this willingness to be present with what is, created a profound stillness around the discomfort, preventing her personal aversion from consuming her entire being and allowing her to respond with greater alertness and clarity. Her breathing deepened, and a sense of calm returned to her, settling like the quiet snow after a blizzard. The night, which had seemed to mock her with its harshness, now invited her to engage with its raw power with a more open heart and a clearer mind. The cold was still there, a challenging note in the grand symphony, but it no longer dictated the melody of her mind. Anya understood that the true suffering came not from the external temperature, but from her internal struggle against it. Her mind's relentless craving for conditions to be different, fueled by trishna, a form of clinging to what is inevitably transient. Jack Cornfield often teaches that the way out is through. Anya, by moving through the cold with mindful presence rather than resisting it, found a deeper understanding of equanimity and inner freedom. Her experience with the Sentinel's vigil was a living embodiment of the power of full presence to transform not the external event, but her internal relationship to it. As she continues her watchful duty, her heart now imbued with a renewed sense of acceptance for the ebb and flow of all phenomena. Let us consider Zephyr, an alchemist who grapples with a different kind of disappointment, discovering that the true source of his anguish lies not in an unfinished elixir, but in his mind's attachment to the outcome, rather than appreciating the process of discovery itself. The alchemist's unfinished elixir. Zephyr, an alchemist whose life was a ceaseless pursuit of transformation, worked in a secluded laboratory filled with the bubbling of retorts, the shimmering of distilled liquids, and the faint, earthy scent of rare herbs and minerals. His days were spent in meticulous experimentation, his hands moving with precise care over delicate instruments, his eyes keenly observing the subtle shifts in color and texture that marked the progress of his intricate processes. For Zephyr, alchemy was not merely a science. It was a profound philosophical quest, a path to understanding the fundamental nature of change and the potential for transcendence, embodying a deep intentionality in his every action. For years, he had been dedicated to perfecting a legendary elixir, a substance rumored to grant profound clarity of mind and boundless inner peace. He believed that achieving this ultimate concoction would be the culmination of his life's work, providing a definitive answer to the mysteries of consciousness and bringing him a sense of complete fulfillment. He had meticulously followed ancient formulas, spent countless nights poring over cryptic texts, and invested every ounce of his energy into this singular, ambitious goal, driven by an insatiable craving for this ultimate outcome. Today, after months of intense, unbroken labor, Zephyr stood before his final distillation apparatus. The liquid within, shimmering with an ethereal glow, was nearing its completion. With bated breath, he watched as the last few drops condensed, falling into the waiting vial. He held up the vial, expecting a sudden flash of insight, a profound sense of completion. Instead, the liquid, though beautiful, remained just that, a liquid. There was no sudden awakening, no transcendent understanding, no definitive end to his quest. It was simply an elegant, yet ordinary elixir, an unfinished answer. This was the first arrow, a direct, undeniable observation of an outcome that did not match his fervent expectation. However, the objective observation was swiftly followed by a familiar surge of intense disappointment and a clinging sense of personal failure. It's not it. All this effort, all these years, for nothing. I have failed to create the true elixir. My work is incomplete, and I am no closer to ultimate peace. This was a monumental waste of my life, a misguided pursuit. This internal narrative, a cascade of frustration, despair, and a deep sense of personal futility, began to weave a far more intricate and painful pattern than the simple fact of the elixir's ordinary nature. His mind, instead of merely acknowledging the outcome, began to condemn it, transforming the raw experience of an unfulfilled expectation into a source of deep suffering, a mental weight far heavier than the vial itself. His shoulders slumped, his eyes grew heavy, and a profound weariness settled over him. deeper than any physical exhaustion. The beautiful elixir, which moments before had held such promise, now seemed to mock him with its perceived lack of transformative power. His suffering arose not from the elixir itself, which was simply a product of his efforts, but from his mind's resistance to its reality, his craving, or trishna, for a specific idealized outcome, and his deep attachment to the idea of a singular, ultimate solution. He was battling not the elixir, but his own expectation that spiritual truths could be bottled, creating a self-imposed prison of intellectual anguish that amplified the factual event manifold. Zephyr remembered the teachings of his old master, a quiet, unassuming herbalist named Ren, who often spoke of the beauty of the journey itself. Ren had once told him, "The true elixir, Zephyr, is not found in a vial, but in the heart that seeks it. The process of searching, of tending, of observing, that is the true transformation. The outcome is merely a shadow." At the time, Zephyr had understood this as a poetic sentiment. But now, as he stared at the unfinished elixir, the words resonated with a deeper internal truth, hinting at a way to navigate not just the intellectual void, but the mental one of attachment to a specific result. Taking a deep, deliberate breath, Zephyr consciously anchored his attention to the raw sensation of disappointment in his chest, allowing his body to settle. He then directed his full presence, his sati, towards the elixir itself. He noticed its shimmering beauty, its subtle aroma, the way it simply was, without demanding interpretation or explanation. He observed that the elixir, though not what he had expected, was not a static, unchanging symbol of failure, but a dynamic, impermanent substance, constantly inviting a fresh perspective, embodying the truth of sunyata, or emptiness, which is full of potential, not lack, and that the path, or magga, itself is the goal. With each mindful breath, Zephyr created a spaciousness, a small pocket of calm within the intense frustration. The ordinary elixir remained, undeniably present, but the frantic intellectual struggle, the clinging to the need for a specific outcome, the mental suffering, began to dissipate. He was no longer fighting the reality of the unfulfilled expectation, but simply acknowledging it, allowing it to be, without needing it to be otherwise. This radical acceptance, this willingness to be present with what is, created a profound stillness around the void, preventing his personal attachment to a definitive truth from consuming his entire being and allowing him to experience the full presence of the process itself, recognizing the cessation, or nirodha, of suffering. His breathing deepened, and a sense of calm returned to him, settling like the quiet after a long patient distillation. The elixir, which had seemed to mock him with its ordinary nature, now invited him to understand that the true wisdom lay not in a final product, but in the boundless potential of the journey, in the beginner's mind, or shoshin, that sees endless possibilities in every moment of discovery. The unfinished elixir was still there, a profound note in the grand symphony of existence, but it no longer dictated the melody of his mind. Zephyr understood that the true suffering came not from the absence of a definitive answer, but from his internal struggle against it, his mind's relentless craving for certainty, fueled by trishna, a form of clinging to what is inevitably elusive. Buddha taught, "The path is not about finding the answer, but about becoming the question." Zephyr, by letting go of his grasping for the ultimate outcome, found a deeper understanding of wisdom and the peace of the ongoing process. His experience with the unfinished elixir was a living embodiment of the power of non-attachment, to transform not the external event, but his internal relationship to it. As he continues his alchemical pursuits, his heart now imbued with a renewed sense of equanimity for the ebb and flow of all phenomena. Let us consider Elara, the master weaver from before, who grapples with a different kind of unraveling, discovering that the true source of her anguish lies not in a loom unexpectedly unraveled, but in her mind's imagining the vastness of the task ahead, instead of simply picking up the first thread. The weaver's unraveled loom. Elara, the master weaver we met earlier, whose workshop hummed with the rhythmic clatter of her loom, found herself once again facing an unexpected challenge. The air, usually filled with the comforting scent of wool and the focused quiet of creation, now held a subtle tension. Her hands, usually moving with such precise grace, were momentarily stilled, resting gently on the frame of her loom, which usually stood as a testament to order and intricate design. For Elara, the loom was a sacred space, a microcosm of the world's interconnectedness, and its integrity was a reflection of her own internal balance, a practice of deep concentration and mindful awareness. She had been working on a vast, ambitious tapestry, a piece commissioned for the great hall of the local guild, depicting the intricate patterns of the changing seasons. It was a project of immense scale and complexity, requiring thousands of threads, each meticulously dyed and carefully woven. She had spent months, perhaps even years, on this single piece, pouring her skill, her vision, and her very essence into its unfolding beauty. The tapestry was nearing completion, a vibrant testament to her dedication, and she anticipated the profound satisfaction of its final reveal, a deep sense of contentment. This morning, Elara entered her workshop, her mind already anticipating the next sequence of stitches. But as her gaze fell upon the loom, a sharp gasp escaped her lips. During the night, perhaps due to a faulty tension mechanism or a sudden shift in humidity, a significant portion of her intricate tapestry had unraveled. Hundreds of threads, meticulously woven and tightly bound, now hung loose and tangled, a chaotic cascade of colors where orderly patterns once lay. It was a disheartening sight, a clear setback, an undeniable physical reality of undoing. This was the first arrow, a direct, undeniable observation of a significant disruption and loss of progress. However, the objective observation was swiftly followed by a familiar surge of intense despair and a clinging sense of overwhelming futility. No, all that work, undone. It's impossible to fix. I will never finish this now. The guild will be so disappointed. I am a failure, and this project is utterly ruined. This internal narrative, a cascade of judgment, hopelessness, and a deep sense of personal inadequacy, began to weave a far more intricate and painful pattern than the simple fact of the unraveled threads. Her mind, instead of merely acknowledging the present state of the loom, began to project endless, insurmountable difficulties into the future, transforming the raw experience of setback into a source of deep suffering, a mental weight far heavier than the entire loom. Her shoulders slumped, her jaw tightened, and a heavy sigh escaped her lips. The loom, which moments before had been a source of pride, now seemed to mock her with its chaotic disarray. Her suffering arose not from the unraveled threads themselves, which was simply a physical state that could, in time, be rectified, but from her mind's resistance to this reality, her craving, or trishna, for an unbroken, effortless process, and her deep attachment to the idea of a linear, perfect progression. She was battling not the loom, but her own expectation that life's creative endeavors should be free of reversals, creating a self-imposed prison of overwhelming anxiety that amplified the physical setback manifold. Elara remembered the teachings of her grandmother, the wise dyer, who had once remarked, "Sometimes the cloth must be unpicked to reveal a stronger weave. Do not fear the undoing, for it is often a path to a deeper understanding of the pattern. At the time, Ilara had understood this as a lesson in design flexibility. But now, as she stared at the tangled threads, the words resonated with a deeper, internal truth, hinting at a way to navigate not just the physical undoing, but the mental one of overwhelming despair and the fear of the unknown path ahead, or magga. Taking a deep, deliberate breath, Ilara consciously anchored her attention to the raw sensation of despair in her chest, allowing her body to settle. She then directed her full presence, her sati, towards the unraveled threads themselves. She noticed their individual colors, their textures, the way they lay, patiently waiting. She observed that the chaos was not a static, unchanging symbol of failure, but a dynamic, impermanent state, constantly inviting a fresh perspective, a new beginning. She focused on one single loose thread, tracing its path, recognizing that even in disarray, there was an underlying order, embodying the truth of sunyata, or emptiness, which holds infinite potential for rebuilding. With each mindful breath, Ilara created a spaciousness, a small pocket of calm within the intense frustration. The unraveled threads remained undeniably present, but the frantic projections of future failure, the clinging to the idea of a perfect trajectory, the mental suffering began to dissipate. She was no longer fighting the reality of the setback, but simply acknowledging it, allowing it to be, without needing it to be otherwise. This radical acceptance, this willingness to be present with what is, created a profound stillness around the perceived disaster, preventing her personal attachment to an ideal outcome from consuming her entire being and allowing her to experience the full presence of the immediate, manageable task. Picking up the first thread. Her breathing deepened, and a sense of calm returned to her, settling like the quiet after a long, patient rethreading. The loom, which had seemed to mock her with its chaos, now invited her to understand that the true path, or magga, lay not in avoiding undoing, but in the patient, mindful process of recreation. The unraveled section was still there, a profound challenge in the grand symphony of her work, but it no longer dictated the melody of her mind. Ilara understood that the true suffering came not from the physical unraveling, but from her internal struggle against it, her mind's relentless imagining of insurmountable future tasks, fueled by Trishna, a form of clinging to what is inevitably transient and subject to change. Buddha taught, "What you think, you become. What you feel, you attract. What you imagine, you create." But Ilara, by shifting her imagination from overwhelming failure to the simple act of picking up one thread, found a deeper understanding of the path to cessation, or nirodha, of suffering. Her experience with the unraveled loom was a living embodiment of the power of present moment awareness to transform not the external event, but her internal relationship to it. As she slowly begins the meticulous process of reweaving, her heart now imbued with the renewed sense of equanimity for the ebb and flow of all phenomena. Let us consider Freya, the gardener once more, who grapples with the different kind of emptiness, discovering that the true source of her anguish lies not in a barren patch of soil, but in her mind's longing for a vibrant plant, instead of finding a quiet sufficiency in the earth's cycles. The gardener's empty plot. Freya, the gardener whose hands had shaped a vibrant sanctuary from the earth, found herself standing before a small, barren patch of soil in the corner of her otherwise flourishing garden. The air, usually alive with the hum of bees and the rustle of leaves, felt momentarily still, carrying only the faint, earthy scent of bare ground. Her gaze lingered on this empty space, a stark contrast to the riot of color and life that surrounded it. For Freya, The garden was a living testament to the cycles of growth and abundance, and this particular plot, once home to a beloved ancient rose bush, now represented a different kind of truth, the profound and often challenging reality of absence, a poignant expression of anicca. The rose bush had been a sentinel in her garden for decades, its gnarled branches offering fragrant blooms through countless seasons. A comforting presence, a symbol of enduring beauty. It had been a source of immense joy and a quiet companion through the years. However, a harsh winter storm had finally taken its toll, and despite Freya's best efforts, the bush had withered and died. She had carefully removed its remains, leaving behind a neat, empty square of dark earth, a space awaiting new life, but for now, simply vacant. This morning, as Freya paused before the empty plot, a familiar pang of sadness rippled through her. The memory of the vibrant rose, its delicate petals and sweet perfume, was vivid in her mind. The plot, though neatly cleared, seemed to echo with its absence, a quiet void in the heart of her abundant garden. This was the first arrow, a direct, undeniable observation of emptiness, a natural, yet disheartening, experience of loss. Her body responded with a subtle contraction, a quiet tightening in her chest, a natural human response to a cherished memory. However, the objective observation was swiftly followed by a familiar surge of profound sorrow and a clinging sense of longing. It's so empty. The garden feels incomplete without it. I miss its fragrance, its beauty. Will anything ever grow there again with such grace? It feels like a piece of the garden, a piece of me, is missing. Mal. This internal narrative, a cascade of grief, resistance, and a deep sense of personal attachment, began to weave a far more intricate and painful pattern than the simple fact of the bare soil. Her mind, instead of merely acknowledging the emptiness, began to condemn it, transforming the raw experience of absence into a source of deep suffering, a mental weight far heavier than the empty plot itself. Her shoulders slumped, her gaze became distant, and a profound weariness settled over her, deeper than any physical exertion. The empty plot, which moments before had been simply bare earth, now seemed to mock her with its perceived lack, its silent reminder of what was no longer there. Her suffering arose not from the physical emptiness itself, which was simply a reality of the garden's cycles, but from her mind's resistance to this fundamental truth, her craving, or trishna, for the rose's continued presence, and her deep attachment to the idea of an eternally full and vibrant space. She was battling not the soil, but her own expectation that beauty should endure unchanging, creating a self-imposed prison of sorrow that amplified the factual event manifold. Freya remembered the teachings of her grandmother, the woman of the earth, who had often said, "The earth is never truly empty, my dear. It simply rests, gathering strength for what is to come." In the quiet of the bare soil, there is a profound sufficiency, a promise of new beginnings. At the time, Freya had understood this as a practical lesson in soil regeneration. But now, as she gazed at the empty plot, the words resonated with a deeper internal truth, hinting at a way to navigate not just the physical void, but the mental one of perceived lack and the craving for constant abundance. Taking a deep, deliberate breath, Freya consciously anchored her attention to the raw sensation of sadness in her chest, allowing her body to settle. She then directed her full presence, her sati, towards the empty plot itself. She noticed the rich, dark color of the earth, the subtle texture of the soil, the way it simply was, without demanding a plant, a flower, or a particular form. She observed that the emptiness was not a static, unchanging symbol of loss, but a dynamic, impermanent space, constantly inviting a fresh perspective, a new possibility, embodying the truth of sunyata, or emptiness, which is full of potential, not inherent lack. With each mindful breath, Freya created a spaciousness, a small pocket of calm within the intense disappointment. The physical emptiness remained, undeniably present, but the frantic grief, the clinging to what was, the mental suffering, began to dissipate. She was no longer fighting the plot's reality, but simply acknowledging it, allowing it to be, without needing it to be otherwise. This radical acceptance, this willingness to be present with what is, created a profound stillness around the void, preventing her personal attachment to a particular form from consuming her entire being, and allowing her to experience the full presence of the earth's quiet sufficiency, its inherent contentment. Her breathing deepened, and a sense of calm returned to her, settling like the quiet after a gentle rain. The empty plot, which had seemed to mock her with its perceived lack, now invited her to understand that the true abundance lay not in constant growth, but in the boundless potential of rest, in the beginner's mind, or shoshin, that sees endless possibilities in every moment of the natural cycle. The empty space was still there, a profound note in the grand symphony of existence, but it no longer dictated the melody of her mind. Freya understood that the true suffering came not from the physical absence, but from her internal struggle against it. Her mind's relentless craving for constant vibrancy, fueled by trishna, a form of clinging to what is inevitably transient. Thich Nhat Hanh often taught that there is no way to happiness, happiness is the way. Freya, by finding sufficiency in the empty plot, discovered a deeper understanding of contentment and the peace of simply being. Her experience with the empty plot was a living embodiment of the power of non-attachment to transform not the external event, but her internal relationship to it. As she continues to tend her garden, her heart now imbued with a renewed sense of equanimity for the ebb and flow of all phenomena. She carries this wisdom as a quiet strength, a profound knowing that even in emptiness there is fullness. As these stories gently fade into the quiet corners of your awareness, let us softly reground ourselves within the comforting embrace of your own body, here, in this present moment. Feel the gentle rise and fall of your breath, the soft contact of your body with the surface beneath you, the subtle warmth or coolness of the air on your skin. There is nothing more you need to do, nowhere else you need to be. You are here, now, and that is profoundly sufficient. Allow any lingering thoughts, any echoes of the stories or the day's events to simply drift away, like leaves carried on a gentle current. There is no need to hold on to them, no need to engage. Just let them go, softening your mind as you release any tension from your jaw, your shoulders, your hands. This is a space of surrender, a sanctuary of peace that you carry within you, always accessible. Prepare now for a deep and restorative sleep, a profound journey into the quiet wisdom of your own being. Recognize the exquisite wonder of this simple act, resting, releasing, and allowing your consciousness to gently recede into the vast, boundless ocean of unconsciousness. You are held, you are safe, and you are worthy of this profound rest. If these words have offered a moment of peace, a quiet insight that resonates with your spirit, we invite you without obligation to consider subscribing. By joining our community, you ensure that this peaceful harbor remains a constant presence in your life, ready to welcome you back whenever you seek its calming embrace. May your sleep be deep, your dreams be gentle, and your awakening be filled with renewed clarity and compassion. Good night.